Well, welcome everybody. I'm Jeremy Lent and very glad to welcome you to the first Deep Transformation live network meeting of 2025. And well, as we all know, there are plenty of grim predictions really for what 2025 might bring as the US President-elect Donald Trump prepares for his inauguration on January 20th. Um, but I've written an article about this last month that, in my view, it seems like there's never been a more important time to broadcast the fact that there is an alternative to this system of extraction and exploitation that is what really I believe has led to the rise of authoritarianism around the world. And of all the visions out there for a positive trajectory, one of the most compelling alternative visions that I have come across for redirecting our civilization to a flourishing future is the Earth for All initiative, which has been generated by really a vibrant collective of leading economic thinkers, scientists, advocates. It was convened by groups including the Club of Rome, the Potsdam Institute, the Stockholm Resilience Centre, and so I'm just so delighted to tell you that to kick off our first session here of 2025, we have three of the leading authors of the Earth for All book that was published to discuss what the Earth for All pathway actually looks like. So I'm welcoming here Sandrine Dixson-Declève. Great to see you, Sandrine, who is the executive chair of the Earth for All and also has been the chairperson of the Club of Rome, is now the global ambassador of the Club of Rome. And Jayati Ghosh, welcome, joining us from Bengaluru, who's a professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts. And thanks so much, Jayati, for joining us so late your time. Glad we were able to make this work. And Ken Webster joining us from England. Ken, welcome. Ken's a fellow of the Centre for Sustainability Leadership at Cambridge University. So our session today is 75 minutes long. We'll have about half an hour or so right now in discussion. Then we'll go into breakout groups for a little bit and then back to the main room for the last half hour where you'll have a chance to ask your own questions to Sandrine, Jayati, and Ken. And meanwhile, if you prefer not to be spotlighted later, but you have a question you'd like to ask, feel free to write it in the chat and we'll collect them. And I can't guarantee it, but I'll try to incorporate some of them in the second half. But now let's get into this conversation. I'm just delighted to have all three of you here. I read the Earth for All book when it first came out. And as I think some of you know, I'm writing a book right now on the vision of an eco-civilization called Eco-Civilization, How We Can Reclaim Our Future, which looks like how a transformed civilization might look if we basically start to set the conditions for all beings to flourish on a regenerated Earth. And I was so excited because the Earth for All initiatives are the very things that I've been focusing on that really drive us towards that positive future. So it's just great we get to talk about it with you today. And so, Sandrine, I understand I mean, you right now are the executive chair of Earth for All. And my sense is that were you the actual sort of founding person driving this? Or I'm kind of curious how this whole amazing initiative got started in the first place.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. And first of all, thank you for the lovely words of bringing forward Earth for All as what you believe is one of the most inspirational pathways of getting us out of the current mess that we're finding ourselves in. I think when we started this process, I don't quite think we thought that it would get to where we are today, to be frank. And I will bring that into some of my reflections. I think that we are increasingly facing an immorality gap on so many levels and are so far away from where we should be in terms of creating greater equity, well-being for more people on this planet, that we do definitely need to think through what are the strategic pathways that are going to enable us to really get out of the current political leadership that we're seeing and the economic neoliberal, re-embracing the neoliberal economy that we know is really driving us to greater inequality, poverty, and also environmental damage. What started our journey? When I was president of the Club of Rome, and I've only just finished my second term and final term as president, we knew that in actually 2022, we wanted to commemorate, do something for the 50th anniversary of the Limits to Growth. We already felt that the Limits to Growth was actually proving its worth beyond what the Club of Rome had said. We found ourselves in great social and environmental tipping points. We were in the midst of the COVID crisis. We also knew that actually, if you look at all the graphs and the scenarios from the Limits to Growth, the deep social and environmental tipping points were shown in those scenarios already in 1972, and that the scenarios demonstrated that those tipping points would occur pretty much in the 2020s.
Right.
So the daunting task I had with my co-president, Mampela Ramfele, was to figure out, well, you can't celebrate an incredible publication that basically told the world the truth and
Right.
yet had not been listened to. But what you can do is figure out how the hell you address where you are at that time and what that looks like in terms of giving some level of hope, but a deep reality check to people around the world.
Mhm.
And so that's what really started the process of bringing together incredible economists like Jayati and Ken to think through, alongside all our other partners, what then is the limits to growth within the 21st century, and how do we actually move forward? And so we started with our publication, Earth for
Right.
All,
Right.
which was foundationally based on system dynamic modeling, the Earth 4 model, which is based on the original world models coming
Mhm.
through the limits to growth and that have been updated since. But we also wanted to stress test that system dynamic modeling by bringing in experts, economists, and a variety of different multidisciplinary thinkers from across the world to really think through, okay, well, this is what the system dynamic model is telling us.
Right.
What does this mean in practice? And so let me finish with saying that the results from that model
Mhm.
demonstrated some very core outcomes. First is that actually we will not meet our climate or environmental challenges without addressing inequality and poverty head on. So that is the first key reality check.
Mhm. Mhm.
The second key reality check is that by putting in place a systemic approach, which takes into consideration the interrelationship between poverty, inequality, empowerment of women, energy, and food, which we call our 5 key turnarounds,
Right.
enables us to get to the principles of an economy of well-being, an economy that actually reflects the needs of people, planet, and prosperity, and ensures that actually we thrive, not just survive on this planet where we know that actually increasing temperatures will make our lives increasingly more difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, wow, that's great. Thank you so much. And it's really interesting for me to hear the connection with the initial limits to growth model that as you're talking, I almost getting the sense this is like the sequel in a sense to limits to growth. If that showed they defined the problem, and then 50 years later that problem hasn't been resolved, what I sense you're doing is actually illuminating what actually can be done, like what is actually possible. And specifically, you were saying there were 5 extraordinary turnarounds that you focus on in the book, right? And just to reiterate, because they're so important, you mentioned one is eliminating poverty, then reducing inequality, empowering women, transforming the food systems, and an energy turnaround. And yeah, and the thing I'm picking up also from what you're saying, what's so important is that oftentimes in the sort of progressive world, there's sometimes this kind of dichotomy between people who are focused on ecological breakdown, environmentalism, sustainability on one side, and people focus on justice and economic justice on the other side. And the key message that I think you're saying is those two are inextricably linked. They're not
Mm.
separate from each other at all. And so perhaps then on that topic, I can turn to you, Jayati, because I understand you have written a lot about what is needed to turn around the extreme and worsening inequality in the world today. And maybe you could kick off just an exploration of this by just like giving us a big top level sense. What are the crucial levers then for eliminating poverty that the Earth for All study identified?
So, yes, thank you so much. It's great to be part of this discussion. And I just want to emphasize again and maybe repeat what you've already said, because I think it's so important. You know, when people talk about sustainability, a green economy, and a sustainable future, they're always really talking about the energy transition.
Yeah.
It's
Mm.
really
Right.
always the focus. And here, that is the fifth. I mean, they're all critical, but that's the fifth transition. In other words, poverty and inequality, these are the critical challenges and barriers that are going to affect our capacity to do everything else. And we all know why there are problems. I'm not going to go into that. And we also know how obscene they have become, how
Mm.
reduction of poverty has actually got regressed. We've gotten worse on that. And inequality gets worse day by day as we
Mhm.
speak. But these are all entirely addressable. And that's the critical message of Earth for All. They require action at all levels. They require it at the national, subnational, and international level. But at the international level, there are so many things that can be done, some of them using existing institutions like the IMF to ensure that they actually produce more special drawing rights, which is a liquidity that they can
Right.
create. That would make available resources to the world. That we can tax the rich, which, by the way, simultaneously also reduces inequality.
Hmm.
The rich today, the richest elites in the world, and the richest corporations in the world get away by paying a fraction of the taxes on incomes that we pay, that ordinary people pay. And these are easily resolvable. It needs some degree of international cooperation, but it really needs political will, even at national level. And that means that we have to have states that are not just suddenly becoming good and behaving benevolently, but are forced to do that by their people. In other words, I think Sandrine would say too, we all see Earth for All not just as a book or a commentary, it's a call for action. And it is a
Yes.
call for saying people can do these actions. Here are the specific things you can demand of your governments to do. We have to do something about sovereign debt, which is completely out of hand. The
Yes.
Pope
Right.
has just issued a statement about how this year has got to be the year of another debt jubilee.
Hmm.
And there are many, many excellent proposals on how we can actually address this. We have to do something about crazy capital flows that respond to investor sentiment and macroeconomic policy in the north, but then destroy the fiscal capacity and the economic prospects of people in the south. And we have to do something about the extraordinary ability of large corporations, not just to avoid taxes, but to profiteer out of crises. We have seen the profits of big multinational corporations go up multiple times during the COVID pandemic,
Hmm.
before that, and in major crises as well, during the Ukraine war, and so on and so forth. So there are many things that can be done, and we've got larger goals and specific targets within them, which can be actually attempted at many different levels of government.
Yes. Well, thank you. You've so highlighted so many of the key things that we need to be doing. And one of the things that, as I've been researching my own book, I was astonished by is the amount of debt, as you mentioned, in the global South right now has, I came across a number that there's $29 trillion in public debt for nations in the global South. And there's an incredible statistic that over 3 billion people now live in countries that spend more on interest payments than on healthcare or education. So the money in the global south is being sucked into the global north to pay the elites and for this debt. So do you think, I'm really curious in your view on this, like what is possible as first steps towards some kind of debt jubilee? Like what, and it would be so great to, is there any possibility of countries in the global south actually getting together, sort of like an OPEC type of joining to say, okay, we are unilaterally calling for this debt cancellation. You either talk to us or you don't, because it's something radical has to be done on this. It's so important.
I completely agree with you. And, I just want to mention, yes, there are all these trillions of debt that low income and middle income countries hold, but they are peanuts compared to the sovereign debt of rich countries.
Yeah.
The world's largest economies hold huge amounts of public debt, and that's not seen as a problem. They have debt to GDP ratios of 112% on average, some countries up to 200, 300%, like Japan. That's not a problem. It's developing countries, it's low and middle income countries. They have only 50% of GDP debt or 20% of GDP debt, but it's in dollars or euro. And that's the problem. They cannot repay. And really, what has to be done in this situation is that a significant part of this debt has to be written off. I just want to remind everyone of the German debt relief that happened in 1951 with the London Agreement on German debt, 1953, I'm sorry, which is like a kind of gold standard of debt relief to me. What they did, all the creditor countries got together and said, half of this debt is immediately being converted into just normal payments. In other words, we're writing it off. The other half, we will demand repayment, but we will extend the time period of the repayment, and we will make sure you never have to pay debt service more than 5% of your exports.
Right.
Now,
I love that. Yeah.
they could do that. And by the way, one of the countries that did that at that time for Germany was Greece, which then got screwed over by Greece when it had its by Germany when it had its own Eurozone crisis. But that could happen.
Yeah.
That's the
Jeremy,
kind
can I
of
quickly
relief we
come in
need.
here just for a sec?
Yeah,
I know that you want to
absolutely.
bring in Ken and all
Yeah,
of his incredible work on
exactly.
universal basic dividend, because that's such
I
an
want to
important
get
part
to
of the
that.
book. But before going there, I want to also bring in, so everyone is aware, that we also calculated the GDP cost of putting in place these turnarounds. And this comes back to Jayati's point. Every single one of our proposals has clear recommendations that we've been making to governments about debt relief or debt elimination, ensuring that we have a proper wealth tax, making sure that we actually look at special drawing rights. But all of this is only really going to cost us 2 to 4% of global income. And we have to remember that what we're doing right now is actually enabling more going into defense, continuous issues around debt, rather than really solving the problem that we have before us. The perversities in our markets are getting so extreme because all the capital is flying to the wrong areas. And then on top of it, we're not taxing the right things. So we have windfall profits on oil and gas companies, 2.7 billion per day that's not being taxed. We continue to have fossil energy subsidies, industrial agriculture subsidies, and people are getting poor. So I just want to bring that in, that we've actually calculated our solutions are not going to cost us the earth, but not doing what we're proposing will cost us the earth. And to someone in the chat who's talked about Kate's incredible work, Kate Rayworth, of course, Kate is also a member of the Club of Rome, and donut economics is a crucial part of the shift that we need to move towards a well-being economy.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Like in a way, Kate Rayworth's donut economics gives the framework to how we actually think about what we're trying to do by establishing the outer boundary, ecological boundary, and the inner boundary of the basics that are needed for people to live a basic, healthy, and flourishing life, which actually turns exactly to this other big topic of what I call universal basic income. But I understand in Earth for All, you're talking about a universal basic dividend, which I want to touch on that nomenclature in a moment. And it was a great opportunity then to turn to you, Ken, because Ken has actually written I should actually mention Earth for All is a book, but then along with it is a ton of about 20 or 30 or so of these deep dive papers, where if you're interested in a topic, you can say, okay, I want to like check in that more. You can read these expert written deep dives into the actual issue in more detail. And Jayati wrote one on economics, and Ken wrote one on the Universal Basic Dividend, which just takes it to the next level of granularity. So this, Ken, I'd love you to just tell us why a universal basic dividend or universal basic income is both beneficial and actually and how could it be practical? Because a lot of people look at something like that and say, oh, we could never afford something like that. So I'd love to hear how you introduce this, which I see as a key crucial lever for a flourishing future.
Thank you for the question, and please ignore my stuffy nose at the moment. Can't help that. I think there's something very important about how things are described, Jeremy. And
yes,
what is important about a dividend is a return from ownership. We all share the atmosphere. We're all co-owners. It is a commons, same as the ocean. And if people want to mess it up, they ought to be discouraged from doing that, shall we say? Or at the very least, they ought to pay a fee towards making sure those commons can be maintained. And that's different from just saying, oh, we're going to have a basic income, as though it was, oh, well, that's going to come from government, isn't it? Whereas those who are damaging the commons should pay into a common pool out of which a dividend as a share of co-ownership is paid. Let's just take the atmosphere. The Baker Schultz plan in the US said that if we charge a fee for emissions and we put it together in a large pool, and then we invest that pool in all the green, other energy technologies and so on, the returns from that pool of investment can be paid to every, in this case, it was to every American citizen, that would at least compensate them for the increase in energy prices. Because if we can't charge real prices for energy, where are we going to go for this? But who should be paying those charges? Those are the people who are using a great deal of energy, and not the poor. We can't have it that the environmental costs are just pushed onto the poor via increased energy prices. That won't work. And trying to keep things slightly separate from a basic income means it doesn't feel like it's, oh, that's a welfare payment, or that's just going to come out of taxes, okay, from the rich, but it's just going to come out of taxes that way. And an interesting element of this notion of a dividend is it's about property. And way back over 100 years ago, the idea of charging additional monies on the unearned income increase of property in the USA, this was an example. I don't know if you remember who it was, Jeremy.
Henry George.
Yes, Henry George, indeed.
Yes.
Henry George was a pioneer in this in the US. He wasn't saying Marxism over there and fundamental capitalism over there. He was saying the big problem is who owns the property.
Exactly.
So they're getting from just owning it. Now, if I was lucky enough to live in London and have a property near a new metro line, my property would go up, let's guess, 80%. But why should I keep all that?
Yes.
Just because, this is a public service that has been provided. Why shouldn't I, when I sell that property, contribute back something to the services which I've benefited from? Yet in the current environment, it's, oh, if you own it, that's it. Everybody else can get lost. And those who own assets are those who are getting richest quickest.
Yes.
And we're not charging them for their ownership of the asset, their access to that asset. Whereas there's a lot of arguments. You could take it from Milton Friedman's side, or you could take it from Henry George and many others in between, that one of the best places to place a tax is on unearned income,
Yes.
unearned increase in value of properties, which are usually excluding others from competing. It's almost like, yeah, if you can control enough of the market, you're going to get economic rents. That's the technical term for it, which are unearned portions dependent only upon ownership, not on what you're providing.
Right.
It's not like,
Exactly.
oh, I'm providing competitive service. Really? There's only 2 or 3 of you in the entire industry? Again, focusing perhaps a little on America, but I haven't got all the categories in front of me, but in many categories, 3 firms control something like 94%
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
through consolidation. So, how is that competitive? Is there any wonder that inflation went up and stayed up in the post-COVID crisis?
Yeah.
It's because once you get customers used to paying high prices, they'll keep paying it
Yeah.
because there's no real competition to bring down the prices there. But
Yeah.
behind all of this, Jeremy and colleagues, is this idea that we need to move from extraction to circulation.
Right. Exactly. Exactly, Ken.
Which brings us looking a little bit closer towards what you're, I think, calling an ecological civilization. That
And
you have got stock maintenance and effective flows back into the core, and that you're engaged, you're encouraging people, enabling them to have access to those resources. And if you're thinking about living systems, if you want to keep a living system thriving, you've got to have this circulation and exchange.
that's right.
It's
Exactly.
not rocket science. It's saying,
Exactly.
would you like to shrivel up your own society by becoming too top heavy so that the oligarchs end up falling over in a heap because there is no base from which to sustain them? I'd rather see it the other way around, and many people would, that we could tolerate something of the oligarchs as long as the base is thriving. It's a bit like saying, oh, I just want the big trees in the forest. That's not going to work.
I like that, Ken. And
On all levels.
So in a way, we can sort of consider this notion of the universal basic dividend a little bit like we think about budders. That it's like the capillaries that take like instead of all the blood being stuck up in the head and then the rest of our limbs just kind of freeze or die off. It's like just kind of pushes gently some of that funding to everyone in the whole system.
In fact, if you look at it the other way around, what is core to this effective system? The exchange happens in the peripheries. If you're looking at forests and trees, it's in the canopy, it's in the root system, in the soil. The main arteries are only there to connect the other little bits together. The primary exchange functions happen at the peripheries. So it's not like, oh, we're going to let a bit escape. It's we're going to build on this thriving community of exchange and allow a little bit of concentration, because when you get efficient systems, you can tend to have volume dominating, but it also becomes quite brittle. There's quite a bit of science about which systems help create a resilient an effective system. And it is the interplay between efficiency and resilience, and this depends only upon diversity.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks.
Diversity is a source of strength and creativity. So there's a very deep scientific basis to how circulation should work. And it's not sort of, oh, that's your ideology. It's this is how it works. Okay, folks? Do you want less or more of it? I'd rather have more of it. Thank you. I'd rather have more of this circulation and more engagement and more, if you like, community self-building, because they have access back to the basic dividend of their share of the ownership that is to which they are entitled.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that, Ken. That explains it so deeply from so many perspectives. What we're really seeing is a universal basic dividend. And I love the term dividend rather than income for the fact that it, like to your point, it's not like a handout from government. It's basically giving people back what belongs to them. So there's a moral basis that actually the vast amount of wealth on the earth today is actually the commons. And there's a historical basis of a diagnosis that what with this inequality we're looking at today is the result not just of some sort of some process of people being more successful. It's a process of enclosure, enforced enclosure over 500 years or more of the commons, and part of that wealth pump being sucked up to the elites. So that's where the universal basic dividend is so fundamental to getting back to a truly ecological civilization. So thank you for that. That's really crucial. And yeah, I'm just looking at the time. And before we go into breakout groups, which I like to do, so we can, as a community, we can just get more intimate talking about these ideas. And then in the second half, we'll be coming back to a general Q&A where people can ask their own questions. I do want to ask a question that is always coming to my mind, and and I'm sure it's in many people as they're hearing this, is these are great ideas and it's so self-evident what needs to be done. How do we get about doing it? What's the sort of theory of change? And of course, in a few minutes is not enough time to go through in detail, but maybe Sandrine, I can turn back to you and just ask if you'd say, what's the sort of the theory of change around Earth for All in terms of getting us from this incredibly pathological state to that better place? How do you think we can begin to make that happen?
Well, unfortunately, Jeremy, it's a bit doing it all at the same time. And exactly as Jayati indicated, I mean, one of the things that I was very cognizant of when working with my colleagues, and it's really nice to see that Petra Kunschkel is here as well, one of our members of the Club of Rome, who's very active in this process, but so many others, and also other partners, was, okay, this cannot just be a publication. This was one of the issues that we saw with the limits to growth, is that it was a publication which really did actually change some people who came to us afterwards and told us what a game-changing seminal report the limits to growth was, but clearly did not have the impact we would have wanted on policy, decision making, and our economic system and financial system. Now, today, we need to really anchor change in a variety of different ways. One is to continue with the science basis and an understanding of the knowledge that we have. So the system dynamic model is our foundation and enables us to use those results and go into countries and work with different governments with our recommendations and clearly have it substantiated by the evidence base that we've been able to develop, both through our social and our environmental tipping points analysis and our well-being index. And I think this is very important. So on the one hand, we have still the science, the knowledge, the diversity of the knowledge, which is the underpinning, the underbelly of how we go out. Then what we do and what we've been doing is really trying to influence levels of conversations across the globe, from the international level at the UN. Jayati is involved in God knows how many committees and constantly pushing and promoting and discussing these issues with governments, whether it be at the G20, whether it be through all the different UN groups, the summits, which we've been actively involved in, the COPs, etc., and really continuously pushing and having those conversations. Then we engage nationally to put in place national programs. And we've already done that in Kenya, in Austria. We're looking actually at the engagement in Germany, which we've already published just recently a report for that national engagement. We've been approached by Brazil, by Ukraine, by also Australia to put in place national engagement strategies. Okay, so that's just two of the areas. But then I think what's really important is a few other prongs. One is citizen engagement, stakeholder engagement, ensuring that we actually support and bring in assemblies, citizen assemblies. And we've been working around both global citizen assemblies and more local citizen assemblies. And then we even just have book clubs. How do we ensure actually that this message gets out to as many people as possible? There are presentations also, as well as, and this is the final key point, narrative building and ensuring that we're actually developing the right narratives. And we've been doing a lot of work on how do we actually influence different audiences with different types of narratives. We also just recently published a global survey with the Global Commons Alliance, where we've actually been able to demonstrate that citizens are calling for this change. And so this will be my last point and my provocation for the breakout groups.
Great.
Which is, we are at a point in time where it is uncontested that a well-being economy is the only way forward, and yet we are moving backwards. And so how do we tap into the manipulation of people? How do we tap into the disinformation? How do we tap into the fear mongering? How do we tap into the anxiety that is building, that is making people actually vote for governments that will not deliver their needs, but do exactly the opposite? What then is the formula that all of us as a community of change agents need to put in place in order to ensure that we don't move further backwards? And that is a questioning that we have to reckon ourselves with as we have all of this incredible data. We've done all of this incredible work. We know it's fundamental for people's well-being, and we know that people want it, and yet they are voting for very different governments that are not going to deliver this. And that, I think, is the fundamental question that is before us today.
This is beautiful. Wow. Thank you so much, Sandrine. You just encapsulated from the highest level to the grassroots level what's needed. And I love the question that you've asked, which let's turn now to our breakout groups. We're going to go into breakout groups of roughly 4 people per group for just 10 minutes. And I've just, I'm going to put in the chat right now questions for you to consider in the breakout group. I just took what you just said, Sandrine. What is the formula for moving toward an Earth for all, basically? And the second question along with that, what part can you play in helping to make it happen? Because we are all part of this potential transformation towards that future we want. So let's explore this in breakout groups, and we'll get back to the main room in 10 minutes from now, where everyone will be invited to just ask their own questions. And I see there's plenty of questions have been put in the chat already to Sandrine, Jayati, and Ken. So see you all in 10. Welcome back, everyone, to the main room. And I really appreciate that we had this opportunity to explore in more intimate groups Sandrine's great question, because it begins and ends with us. I mean, the ideas are there. Earth for All shows what is possible and why it's possible, but that transformation is only going to happen when we're all of us who recognize the possibility and care about it are engaged in it. And I invite now people to raise their Zoom hands if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Sandrine, Jayati, and Ken. And a number of people put great questions in the chat, so I won't be able to get to them all, but I will plan to intersperse some of them, some of the raised hands with the chat questions. But to begin with, Joseph, I see you're here spotlighted. Let's turn to you, Joseph, for the question.
Okay, well, your question was, what can you do? What's the formula? And I want to be a critique. We have 168 people on this call, and we're like so many ships in the night. We don't know. I don't know who else is an engineer. I'm influential in the engineering profession, and how can I work with other engineers if it's not an efficient way to identify people that have a mindset? We want to make the engineer profession more focused on a world that works for all and not destruction. So that I've shared this in my workout group that I'd like to facilitate people in Deep Transformation Network and other similar groups getting to be more peer-to-peer and not so much, hierarchical. Thanks.
Thanks. And so, Sandrine, I also noticed on the same theme, somebody asked in the chat about, I think Shannon, in fact, asked about the Earth for All is invite only. And we want, how can it be like a two-way discussion or something? I don't know, Shannon, if you wanted to say anything more about that on this theme or.
Yeah. I got my hand up, so might as well just kind of broach it this way. So I guess my question kind of revolves around all three of your outputs and your discussions. But my experience, I've been advocating for grassroots, ground level, practical initiatives for addressing our food system and tying that into climate resilience for a number of years now. And what my experience is that largely academic institutions, scientific institutions, think tanks, global foundations, pretty much all of the organizations that are globally focused and that are working on this at a theoretical level, and they're asking these questions like, what do we do and how do we do this over and over again, are largely not open to input from guys like me that are working on the ground. I don't have a PhD. I don't have a scientific background. I come from small business entrepreneurship and Army logistics. And I've got a very different kind of, I've got practical strategies that I'd love to share with the Club of Rome and with your group. But when I go to your website, it's invite only, and there doesn't seem to be a path to share this information. So I guess my question is this a two-way conversation?
So very good question, and thank you for that provocation. So actually, Earth for All is absolutely open. Club of Rome isn't. You're right. Club of Rome has always been a membership-based organization. But if you look at Earth for All, it's purposefully actually asking people to sign up, and it is part of a larger movement building conversation. So that's the first. Secondly, I would really hope that Earth for All is not perceived as just theoretical. I think many of us really have tried to be as hands-on as possible. And I think we all, can someone put themselves on mute? Because I keep on hearing interference when I'm speaking. Thank you. So Shannon, I think your point though is spot on. And I think the key, and also the point that was made before around engineers, we have a big problem of bringing the broader community together. And there is in some circles some elitism. Fully agree with you on that. I'm hopeful that within our circles and the work that we're trying to do, it's not elitism. It's just often not knowing, even though we're open, we don't always get to the right people, and the right people don't, and people just don't always come to us. How can we broaden that? How can we create better networks to ensure that we actually do speak and make this both bottom up and top down approach feasible, actionable, impactful? And that's where we all need to be. I often talk about Cambridge Analytica for good as well, by the way. I fundamentally believe that we need to be a hell of a lot more strategic. The other side has bombarded our society with manipulative tactics, which are pushing people in a very different direction. Right. I don't want us to be unethical, but I think we have to be a hell of a lot smarter in the way in which we do this.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sandrine. And I just wanted to put in this conversation, and then we'll turn to you, Derek, in a second. But here on the Deep Transformation Network, we have a very a grassroots network of thousands of people worldwide, all committed to this kind of transformation that Earth for All is talking about. And we have a decentralized organization. We have a mobilizing action circle focusing now on trying to move these ideas into action. So I wanted to explore this possibility, just put out there that we can take further offline, of potentially having an Earth for All sort of hub or space or whatever on the Deep Transformation Network to allow, if it would be helpful for Earth for All, more of an interactive way of communicating about these ideas. So just putting that out there. And let's turn to Derek.
Well, Hello. Yeah, my name's Derek Dearden. I'm talking here from the New Forest in Hampshire. I read the, I want to thank all of the presenters here for terrific ideas that they put forward for the very well structured nature of the book. I read the executive summary today. I haven't obviously had a chance to review the book, but it's all very good, solid stuff. I'm an engineer. I'm particularly interested in how we build a sustainable society, living within our energy budget and our resources budget. And the point I wanted to make is that there were, I think, 3 points which were slightly missing from today's presentations. One of them is that the future that we are all committed to living in is not going to happen unless we put an end to warfare. The human tragedy of what's going on in Ukraine and what's going on in the Middle East, we don't need to dwell on, but it's tragic. And not only is it tragic from the human point of view and the suffering point of view, it's also tragic from the complete wastage of energy and steel and everything else that goes into that. The second thing I wanted to say is that there seems to be an acceptance in the summary I read that economic growth and GDP are somehow important measures of human well-being. And I would question whether that is actually well conceived. And finally, I would like to say that one thing that's not been raised here, but which is crucial, is the necessity for a real spiritual renaissance, because with that, all of these other things are possible. And without it, I cannot see it happening.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. And as we'll turn to answer that, but also just wanted to note, we've got about 10 people with their hands up, and we got about 15 minutes left. So let's make sure that the comments and questions are concise so we can hopefully fit people in. But I don't know if Sandrine, Jayati,
Yeah, I'll answer it really quickly. And Jayati wants to come into the first is on ending warfare. Could not agree more. I mean, the defense budget is what's killing most of our economies as well as our people. And so many other people. And, we really should be concerned about this. Also, if we talk about positive peace, then it totally changes the level of the conversation, but we don't talk about positive peace. Beyond GDP is core to Earth for All, and we haven't had the time to go into the beyond GDP conversation and new indicators, and we're very much working on this, and it is absolutely a part of Earth for All. And the spiritual renaissance, again, we've talked about the Inner Development Goals as one of our deep dives. So there's a lot of different material on our website, which also looks at that spiritual renaissance and the need also to look at inner development. But thank you, Derek.
Yeah, thanks. So complete, so comprehensive. Michelle, let's see.
Hold on, Jayati wanted to say something.
Oh, sorry,
really quickly,
yes,
Jeremy.
yes.
You're on mute, Jayati.
Still on mute. Huh.
I think many of us were muted, actually. I think there's someone who's
muted. Somebody has to unmute me. They just did it. Yeah. No, very, very quickly, I want to add to what Sandrine said about GDP. Absolutely, we do not believe it is an indicator of progress. Most often it is even pernicious. It counts all the wrong things. It leaves out all the best things. So there's no sort of dispute about that. However, to meet the basic needs of everybody on the planet, to eliminate poverty, we do recognize that there is a minimum level of per capita GDP that countries have to achieve. So while we are not degrowth in general, we are in fact pro-growth in very poor countries with per capita incomes of less than $15,000, because we believe everybody has the right to live a life of dignity which includes basic needs and, in fact, even things like connectivity and so on and so on.
Perfect. Thank you, Jayati. So crucial, really key point. Michelle.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much. Very stimulating conversation. I just wanted to ask, why do you think it is? So governments have kind of maybe known about some of the things that you've been talking about for some time. Why do you think it is that they are not acting on your recommendations? I appreciate that now we live in a very different world and there's a lot of very hostile media and obviously follow the money, you know, who's owning the media and why is it in their interest? You can understand that. But it's, yeah, why do you think that governments are not paying attention? Why is that?
So I think that, I mean, I started my career with Al Gore and the whole debate around climate. And it's really quite interesting if you look, obviously, in the 80s and 90s and the amount of data we had on climate change. I think there are different reasons for why we've had inaction. 80s and 90s and 70s, actually, post the limits to growth. Economic growth was so prevalent and neoliberal governments felt that we could continue to grow and it wouldn't have an impact either on our environment, and also they really believed in trickle down, even though it was pretty obvious that trickle down would not happen. But since then, I think the over financialization of our economy is not enabling governments now to even have the control that they used to have in the decision making that they have. And this is what bothers me even more, which is the fact that we no longer have leaders that are ready to stand up to the power and the money of the wealthiest in the world. And we're seeing it play out right now in the United States, and it will continue to play out in other countries. The economy does not reflect the needs of people, and politicians are actually getting increasingly bought out by the most powerful millionaires across the globe. And this is the oligarchy that now Bernie Sanders is talking about. This is the oligarchy that we've been warning about and is happening. And we need to understand its deep roots. And Jayati could speak about this even more. But if you look at BlackRock, if you look at the investment community and how much ownership of debt they have, this is no longer just about the IMF. This is not just bitching about the Bretton Woods institutions. This is about the perversity and the immorality of our investment structures and our finance structures that we've enabled to take our entire economy hostage. And that is asphyxiating the decision-making apparatus from not enabling them to do what they need to do. That's what's so frightening.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Sandrine.
Can I quickly add to that? I mean, I completely agree. Just let's emphasize, we are all living in oligarchies. Yes, there are democratic veneers and occasional, but we are all living in oligarchies. The only way to confront oligarchies is actually the countervailing power of people. So we cannot do this without popular movements and major mobilization.
Yeah, thank you. Well said. And also the importance of the citizens' assemblies and shifting our structures in terms of governance. And before we turn to you, Alan, and then to Beth, just wanted to put in a couple of questions from the chat, and just a small selection. But Tom Athanasio asked, he said, please address the all-important sequencing question. What needs to be done first to set the agenda and to build momentum? So that's one question. Secondly, Randy Hayes asked, the main funder of the book is willing to go bigger if there's a good implementation plan. Where does that effort stand? What implementation budget ranges are you looking at? 2 million, 20 million, or 200 million, like to make the changes we happen? So I just put those questions out there. Maybe why don't we just maybe have those there, but also turn to Alan and Beth. So we've got a number of questions for you to consider so we can hopefully get more voices in the conversation. Alan, you want to just share your question?
Yes, thank you. And my question is linked to the third question of Derek and your answer, Sandrine, the spiritual dimension. How much are your efforts linked to the inner development goals? And to what extent are you also looking at the major changes that are needed in the education system, which is very separation oriented, not wholeness oriented, as you compare it to the indigenous traditions, for instance. And so what is to be done there? Because we can wish that people get involved, but if they stay involved from the same mindset they have, which is I'm separate from you and have nothing to do with the whole, we are not going to go very far. And I think this is particularly very obvious in this country in the last election.
Thank you. And let's hear your question, Beth, and then turn back to Sandrine, Jayati, and Ken for their reflections.
Yeah, and I think my question, it dovetails with what was just said. I'm a high school teacher and I have 2 teenagers, and I'm holding this question of how to orient them to this reality. How much is too much? And what are the interpersonal neurobiology, spiritual skills that are essential so that we don't increase suicidality in our young people?
Thank you. Thank you, Beth.
Jeremy, did you want us to respond?
Yes, really just open to any of the 3 of you to respond in whatever way you feel is right to these questions.
Okay. I can come in very quickly on the sequencing. I mean, I'm one who really believes that we need to hack the system now as much as create the long-term seeding. One of the hacking aspects has been about looking at new indicators and really thinking through what that means, all the way from the statistical offices and kind of staying under the radar and shifting on the stats. And we've been doing that across Europe and also in a variety of different countries. And the other has been looking at beyond GDP indicators, which is now actually being looked at both in G20 context, also in the UN, and also in the European Union, including the 5 well-being countries. Someone said that well-being is not being accepted by most governments. And that's true. And in some ways, actually, the well-being economy governments are even backtracking in some ways. So what we're trying to do there is very much push the new indicators while at the same time working with the bottom-up approach of doing exactly what Jayati was saying, which is, how do you create popular movements? How do you ensure that you have the underbelly of the people behind you when you push the governments to measure different things and do the right things rather than just focus on profit and power? So that's one thing. On the educational system, so fundamental. The Club of Rome has been working on a lot of discussions around new educational programs. We're working on a master's program and also working with a variety of different educational institutions, in particular business schools, not so much primary and high school. Although I do think that, and I don't know, Alain, if you are French speaking or not, but
yes, I am.
Okay, if you are, you can remember that actually in schools across Belgium and France, and I don't know in Canada as well, we used to have actual religion classes offered, all religions, and all kids could choose and go between these different religions, as well as take a morality class. And I fundamentally believe that we need to reinstitute a class which talks about love and human behavior and what it is to be a good neighbor and what it is to bring in those core values of being a human being on this planet within a broader ecosystem. This has been totally eliminated from most educational systems, beyond the fact that parents should be bringing up their kids in this way. And that does then touch on the interpersonal, because it starts to question what are values and what are deep human values, and bring back, hopefully, those deeper values that we all hold so dear, which seem to be thrown under the carpet these days.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And the sense I'm getting from this whole conversation is there are so many multiple layers of transformation that are needed. And rather than let that overwhelm us, what we got to recognize is that they each can reinforce the other towards that transformed change that we want. And this is what I'm so appreciating from this. And let's go, I think Jose Antonio, I think was next
Yes,
on
yes,
the list.
I'm here. Oh,
We see you, Jose.
Yeah, we
okay, okay.
spotlighting seems to
I'm
be,
seeing somebody else. Okay.
yeah,
There
see.
are two things that I'm going to add to my three comments. The first is that back in 1992, the update to the book that started this all, there was a comment saying that the tools that they were using were not sufficient. I interpret that system dynamics was not enough. But then in 1998, in the publication on No Limits to Learning, there was an identification that most of the things that we've been doing were about adaptation, and there was no anticipation. Adaptation learning is limited. It has some difficulty. How you deal with that? You deal with that.
Let me just interrupt you, Jose Antonio. Could you just move to a question? Because we just have a couple of minutes left, and we've got a lot of questions out there. So, do you have a particular question to ask?
Okay. Why don't Health for all accept they should move into anticipation? And there's a lot of anticipation work done that's not considered.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And because we just have a couple of minutes left, can we maybe invite, we're not going to get to all the questions out there, but maybe if Daniel, Barnaby, Nadine, and Petra, let's just bring your voices in to the conversation. I'm sorry for those who are going to get left out, but just if you can keep your question just to a brief sentence, at least we can get some more perspectives in here.
Yeah, I think it's all driving us toward a place where we recognize that we're one species and we belong to each other, and that we have to make a step to integrate each other into each other's lives. Because that seemed to be like the systemic commonality, that we're still competing for life with each other. And that's our behavior on the streets. And if we don't change that, nothing will change.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Nadine?
Yeah, hi. I guess my question is just a quick observation of the culture of fear and it's manufactured and that it's not transparent. And Sandrine, I loved what you said because I've been doing this kind of work for 40 years in terms of community engagement levels. And I guess I got to a place where the political will can only be influenced by the social will. That can only be influenced by changing hearts and minds and the awareness of that culture. So my question is resources. How do we resource that? There's community-based social marketing, the Canadian gentleman that started that. There's tools, but how do we bring them, get them out? It's happening in lots of places, transition towns, transition network. But how can Earth for All help maximize that? And get that out, because I think that is the core, is disrupting the manipulation and sort of, to use that overused term, the waking up piece.
Yeah.
This is what our culture is doing to us, and we are oblivious.
Thank you, Nadine. Let's finish with you, Barnaby. Just a quick question or comments, and then we'll close with each of Sandrine, Jayati, and Ken.
Let's bring Petra in also as a fellow traveler on Earth for All. I would really like that.
For noticing that.
Well, I'd just like to invite the panelists to have a look at Pause for Peace Sociocracy Circle, which is the first action agreed by the Mobilizing Action Circle of Deep Transformation Network. Can we tackle the economic and injustice and ecological issues with the same solutions that we tackle war with and genocide, i.e. with citizens' peace assemblies and global assemblies? And there are people in 3 continents pausing for peace each day and weekly, calling for a global ceasefire and for these alternative peace solutions.
That's great. Thanks for bringing that in. And I invite you to explore on the DTN what Pause for Peace is doing. And so let's turn to you, Petra, for our last question.
Great. Thanks so much. Sorry, my video, my camera is not where I am. Don't worry. What I wanted to say, the insight is the two things. I couldn't agree more with Sandrine and Jayati about kind of both. We need to hack the system. We need kind of positive Cambridge Analytica, and we need to empower, or we kind of really repower a movement. Because the one thing that I want to bring in is a thought. We need to make sure, or let's say we need to drive all efforts that we don't compete among sustainability transformation efforts, because we still do. And that's the, with all the networking that we do, there is still kind of a castle, around each and every, and a competitive attitude. We need to give up any competition, and we need to work between the policy level and the movement level much more integrated, because this is a task, that really requires maximum collaboration. And that's kind of my recommendation that I would like to bring in. And strategy. Yes, we need strategy.
Yeah, thank you. And but actually, because I see just one hand still up from Dr. Ritu Verma, can we maybe get your comment in, Ritu, if that's okay, and then we can feel complete.
Hi, can you hear me? My video doesn't seem to be working. I apologize for that.
No worries, we can hear you great.
So I just have two really quick points to make. Just picking up on what Sandrine said about the other side. The other side being the forces of backlash, of backsliding against degrowth and moving beyond GDP. There is a lot of pushback, and it's coming from these global institutions that do promote growth as being equivalent to progress. And so, I'm just wondering, what's the strategy? How do we, manage that pushback? And it's also coming from corporations, and as people have mentioned in the media, disinformation and all that. But really, it's the global institutions, that manage the world at large. And then I think the second thing is about taking a decolonial perspective. I've been working on moving beyond GDP for more than a decade. And I've been to several conferences, but I really find that the conversation is dominated by scholars and activists from the global north. And it would be really great, I think, to see the conversation, to have more participation, more resources for people from the global south, voices from the global south, as Jayati mentioned also, that people think differently about degrowth and moving beyond growth from a global south perspective. So I really, and by the way, the global south is not homogenous either. There's a lot of different perspectives out there. So just, those two things. How do we deal with the backlash from the powers that be? And how do we get more of a global south perspective into these conversations? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ritu. Great perspectives. And let me just turn to each of you, Ken, Jayati, and Sandrine, just if you want to just add a few final words in closing here in this really rich conversation we've been having.
Jayati, you go first, and Ken.
Oh, okay. Yes, because otherwise, Sandrine, you say it also beautifully. I was going to leave it to you. But I will take up this point about degrowth because I think it's really important. I really think that that's creating a red herring. We are not talking about degrowth. We are talking about a well-being economy. Sometimes that means growing GDP. Sometimes it means falling GDP. Sometimes it means stagnant GDP. That's not the point. The point is a well-being economy. If we focus on that, instead of telling people, oh, your GDP has to come down, then you get much more of an audience and you can get many more people with you. So I would really implore everybody not to just keep saying degrowth, because it's not about degrowth. It is about creating a well-being economy that delivers social and economic justice to everyone.
Beautiful.
Within planetary boundaries. That's what we want. So please, let's just not use that term. Let's just get on with doing what we want and trying to get there. Final point I want to make in terms of the doing what we want. I honestly don't believe in sequencing. I don't think it's possible. The
Mhm.
problem is it's polycrisis, it's multidimensional, it's octopus-handed. So we have to look at all of these, which means some do something, another lot does another thing, but we join. And we work in groups, we work in coalitions, we work whenever we can on issue-based coalitions, even if we disagree about some other aspect. We have to learn to work in coalitions because we're dealing with very strong enemies. But we also have to learn, I think, and this part is important, it's a systems approach, not just intellectually. It has to be a systems approach coming from within, which basically means everything is interdependent, everyone is interdependent. And
Beautiful.
once we've absorbed that, then we can actually get on with doing the kinds of changes that are required.
Mm. Thank you, Jayati. Great summary. Ken, you wanted to add a few words?
Yeah, just a very few words. I know we're out of time, really. But an old mentor of mine once told me, too many lists, not enough stories.
Mm.
And I think that's really, really important. In other words, you can include and include and include and make sure nobody's left out. But what's the narrative? What are you actually chasing that says you're different, you've got a better set of solutions, and you will bring people with you? You don't bring people with you just by including them. You've got to include them in a narrative about social and economic progression, and that's got to really appeal. We've got to be able to appeal to some of those people who are currently voting or acting in different ways. And we can't do that by standing off. We've got to say, this is what it would mean for you. That's what I mean about not too many lists, not enough stories. I haven't yet seen the economics of the future engaging enough people to say, we are for this, this is what we want.
Yeah.
Rather than, oh, this is what we don't like.
Yeah. That's
So
great.
that would
Thank
be
you.
my point. Thank
And
you very
let's
much for the invitation.
Yeah, thanks. And let's turn to you, Sandrine, for closing, and then I'll just add a couple comments at the end.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jeremy, and thank you so much for the engagement from everyone. And I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone's points. Ritu, I could not agree with you more in terms of ensuring that whatever conversation we have around growth and a new kind of growth, to Jayati's absolutely fundamental point. To be frank, I think the degrowth movement is doing the entire movement an injustice. And I think we need to be careful because our leaders are pointing at the degrowth movement and then bringing everyone else in and saying, these are what those radical idiots are trying to do. They're trying to make the rest of the world, especially the global south, not grow when they actually need to have an economic shift and develop in a different way. It's a very different type of conversation. And Jayati is so absolutely right. There's a difference also, and Ken, I'm surprised you didn't pick this up, between growth and consumption as well. We need to totally shift our consumption patterns and grow differently. And that's the beauty of what we're trying to do. That's also why sequencing is not possible, because it all has to happen at the same time. And complexity is exciting. I'm excited by this. I'm not excited by the immorality. I'm not excited by the fear mongering, to the very good question around the culture of fear. And the only way we can hack the fear mongering is get back to people and understand what makes them tick. That's what Cambridge Analytica were so good at, and that's where we need to get better. And what makes them tick is not necessarily what makes us tick. And this comes back to really figuring out how we shift our narrative to different audiences. That comes to the resourcing. The philanthropic organizations, more and more of them, are understanding the importance of this work, but it's not enough. And so, yes, we do need to have more public finance, not just the philanthropic finance, moving in this direction. But it also means that we actually need to think about what are the ways in which we can hack that cost us nothing. And I talk about all the time, hacking everything, every conversation we have with more humanity. It's not just about the inner development goals. It's about every single conversation that we have it differently at every level. When I have a conversation at the UN, and I know Jayati does too, we don't just come in for the jugular. We try to remember that we're actually talking to human beings as much as we may abhor what they're saying. And I think that needs to happen. And the more we push that type of movement, then hopefully the more we can get rid of the hate and the fear. It's a lot to ask for, but it's the only way that we can move forward, and it costs us nothing. And then the last point around the kind of the decolonial aspect, and something I also saw in the chat around why we didn't have more youth on this call, which we should have, because the youth are very, very much interested in this conversation. I absolutely believe that the planet that we have today, and the only way that we will move forward, is by reminding ourselves, each and every single individual, that we are part of a greater ecosystem. And that includes, and there were questions in the chat also about greater well-being across the full ecosystem. We need to bring ourselves down, we as human beings, back into an understanding of our role within that ecosystem. And that also means those of us in the global north understanding that we are as weak as the weakest link, and that we also have a lot of issues with our past, that what we need to do now is better understand how we can build a brighter future together by both acknowledging the past and the colonial past, but also ensuring that we build partnerships in a very different way. And that is a very different type of conversation that needs to happen today.
Wow. Thank you so much, Sandrine, and each of you for what you've brought into this, into the DTN and into this conversation today. This feels to me like one of the most important, richest conversations that's taken place here on this global network in the years since it began. And I'd love it for not to be the end of something, but the beginning of something more. I feel there's so much potential for interacting further in these areas. And so really a deep, deep bow of appreciation to all three of you. And I just want to remind everyone who's here right now that actually is a little bit like a follow-on from this conversation will be taking place on Friday. Again, here on the DTN, I put the link in the chat right now. It's a live conversation. Originally, it was going to be with me and Fritjof Capra and Mara Gamble. Fritjof, unfortunately, had to cancel his participation, but the conversation is still going to go ahead because it's so important. As the system unravels, where do we go from here? So very much to what Jayati was saying before, and Sandrine, about this being a really systems-based understanding of the transformation we need. So I invite you all to join in that conversation on Friday. In the meantime, thank you for this great discussion today. It feels really important, and I feel like we're kicking 2025 off in the right way, which is what is needed more than anything, is to forge a path to the future that is still possible, even as things get so dark all around the world right now. We know that that future is possible, and we can put our lives and energy into it as we do it together, not just focusing on our own individual initiatives, but working together to create that transformative movement for change. And you're all doing that so well, and I want to thank you from my heart for what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. And thank you to my comrades, my comrade in arms, Jayati and Ken. So appreciative. Rito, please reach out, because we definitely want to include you in the well-being discussions.